What up, nerds? My name is Leslie Smith. Welcome to the Nerdy Narrative, a channel where I like to talk about all sorts of fun bookish related things in the science fiction, fantasy, horror, and manga genres. In today's episode of fun, I am going to talk to you about some of the best reads of 2020, at least they were for me. I also have to tell you, I completely ripped this idea off from Jimmy over at the Fantasy Network. I'm gonna have his channel linked below, and of course his video where he went over his favorites. I did ask him first. I watched the video a couple of weeks ago on vacation, and I messaged him and I was like, Jimmy, I really like your format. Can I please rip this off? He was like, absolutely. So thank you so much, Jimmy, for letting me take your format and fit it to my use here. Alright guys, so let's talk about my best stuff for 2020. We're just going to talk about some general things and then we'll close with my top 10 favorite reads of 2020. While I do read several genres on the channel, I do still primarily read fantasy. So one of the categories Jimmy covered was the best non-fantasy read of 2020. For this video, I'm going to stick to the main genres I read, which are fantasy, science fiction, manga, and horror. So my favorite horror book of the year award is going to go to The Patience of a Dead Man by Michael Clark. It is the first book of a trilogy, which I do plan to complete that trilogy next month. I absolutely adore this book for many reasons, all of which you can find in the review that I'm going to have linked above for you. But this is absolutely, hands down, my most favorite haunted house story. And it just quickly became the benchmark for which I will measure any haunted house story that I read. For science fiction, I picked a standalone. I went with Recursion by Blake Crouch. This book evoked a lot of emotions in me. I also like to tell people it's not science fiction, it's actually a romance. The thing that I like about Blake Crouch with his science fiction, he makes it understandable. It makes sense. It's not so inundated with terms that are just difficult to understand unless you have multiple degrees. I really just honestly feel this is a book that anybody could pick up, read, and enjoy for different reasons. So as far as manga, the clear winner is the One Piece series by Aikaro Oda. While I only got into manga last year, I was able to read several different series, and I feel like I have a good foundation, enough of one with enough comparisons of those like it to make that decision. I am going to continue my journey with manga and getting into some different types this year, so I'm really looking forward to that. I do expect to keep going and keep that incorporated into my daily reading life. But yeah, nobody at this point can even touch One Piece. I will say that I am specifically referencing the first 23 volumes. There are actually several arcs that I love in One Piece. There are a couple that I just kind of like. There's really one I don't like. So I'm mainly talking about the Alabasta arc. So best characters of 2020. Again, let me break these out by genre. So my runner-up is Gideon the Ninth. She is absolutely hilarious. I need somebody who has known me personally for like the last 20 years to read this book and tell me if it's just me or if they agree. But I promise you, Gideon the Ninth is Leslie Smith in print. That's just me. That is my opinion of it. And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna test that theory. I'm gonna send this book to my best friend Heather. She's known me forever, like knows me. I'm gonna be like, read this book and tell me if you don't think this would be me. And you know what? Heather's gonna be like, yep, you're Gideon and I'm Harrow. Gideon the Ninth is a runner-up. First place for science fiction for favorite character of 2020 is Thrawn from Chaos Rising, the new Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy by Timothy Zahn. This was my first foray into the Star Wars books. I'm going to continue that this year. I'm actually going to be reading the original Thrawn series, so I can't wait to learn more about him. He is just absolutely fascinating to me. So yeah, he gets first place. So favorite characters of 2020 for the horror genre. Runner-up is going to be Vincent from Nightmare by Chad Nicholas. Vincent, I can't go into detail about why I love him so much if you haven't read this book. If you have read this book, hit me up on Discord, link in the description down below if we are not already pals, and I'll tell you there. I can't tell you if you haven't read it. You need to read it, and then I can tell you. But I absolutely adored Vincent in this story. First place character for horror in 2020 is a character that is in The Resurrectionist by Michael Patrick Hicks. The series is actually named after the character, which is the Salem Holly series. Salem Holly is just absolutely my favorite as far as character in a horror book. So this series is a historical cosmic horror, and it is just phenomenal. I am still holding a breath I didn't know I was holding for book 3 in this series, but there are currently 2. We've got The Resurrectionist and Born of the Deep. This series is amazing. Michael Patrick Hicks is an amazing author. It's beautifully written. He's just one of those authors that can say so much with so few words, which is just a freaking art form. Salem Holly is just such a compelling character that I absolutely am obsessed with. Yeah, hands down, he is my favorite horror character of 2020. So now let's get on to my favorite fantasy character of 2020. So runner-up is from the Stormlight Archives. That's going to be Adolin Colan. A lot of you know I made so much fun of Adolin. I didn't hate him, but I also kind of poked a lot of fun at Adolin as a character. But as the series progressed, I absolutely fell in love with him, and he is now my favorite character of the series, which is just hysterical to me to look back on that journey. But my favorite fantasy character comes from the Faithful and the Fallen series, and it was tough to choose one because there are so many characters in this series that just feel like family to me. You get to know them so well. John Gwynn is just a master at character development, in my opinion anyway. And there are so many good and bad and great characters that I loved. And I had to narrow it down to just one. I just sat down and I thought about it, and I was like, all right, who did I connect with? Who tugged my heartstrings? Who broke my heart, made me cry with happiness or respect, admiration? And that is McQuinn. McQuinn is just absolutely one of my favorite characters of all time, not just 2020. If you haven't read this series, why? Please read this series. Right now, I have 4 people that are messaging me as they make their way through the Faithful and the Fallen series, and I'm living for it, absolutely living for it. And anytime they mention McQuinn, it just makes my heart grow 2 sizes. And as far as manga, my runner-up would be Edward Eldrick from Full Metal Alchemist. And as you can probably guess, my first place love in manga is going to be Monkey D. Luffy from the One Piece series. Okay, so the next category is Best Completed Series of 2020. Breaking it down into the different genres, I haven't completed a series yet for any of my horror favorites. I've got several series that I'm working my way through. My top 2 favorite series that I'm reading are the Salem Holly series that I mentioned earlier, and then the Nightmare Land Chronicles, but they're ongoing, so they aren't completed for me to complete. Same thing for science fiction. I haven't completed any series. I have started some, so that's another one we'll kick to the end of this year. But as far as fantasy, the best completed series I read fantasy-wise is The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynn. That series is epic. And yes, it's a series that has a lot of the familiar tropes that we see in so many other series. But John Gwynn does it better. He does it well, and he does it better, at least in my opinion. And from all the people that I have talked into reading the series that has come back to me and talked about it, has agreed. We cannot all be wrong, right? There's just no comparison. Now, there are a lot of series that I have started, and there's a lot of series that aren't completed yet, so that may be subject to change. But not only is The Faithful and the Fallen my favorite series of 2020, it is definitely in my top 5 favorite series, fantasy-wise, of all time. All right, so next up, let's talk about the best ongoing series that I have for 2020. So for science fiction, I'm going to go with the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. I started it in 2020 and plan to finish it in 2021. I've watched the show and I absolutely adored the show, and I do feel that watching the show first makes the books a much more enjoyable reading experience. So that is my favorite science fiction ongoing series. With fantasy on an ongoing series, I honestly at this point can't choose between the Dresden Files, Stormlight Archives, and Lifeship Traders. I will be completing Lifeship Traders this coming year, so that could change. I do know that I liked Ship of Magic more than the Stormlight Archives. So, So I might have a clear winner, but it's hard to tell because Brandon Sanderson still has 6 more books that he's going to put into the Stormlight Archives. Of course, they may not all be published before I die, so you know, Robin Hobb might get it by default, y'all. And then best ongoing series as far as horror, that's going to be the Nightmareland Chronicles by Daniel Barnett. They are outstanding. Everyone that has read those books, everyone has come back to me and told me they loved them. I have been thanked by so many people for recommending that series and exposing them to it. I mean, I literally, that is one series that nobody has given me negative feedback on. Nobody. I mean, even with the Faithful and the Fallen series, I did have like 1 or 2 people like, I didn't like it. They didn't make it past the first book, which was full of tons of character development, but nobody's given me negative feedback on the Nightmareland Chronicles. And I am just in love with that series. The character development is some of the best I've ever seen. The story is amazing. It's a post-apocalyptic horror about the day that the sun went out. Oh my gosh. I am just absolutely in love with that series. So that'll take care of some of the general categories about some of my best of 2020. Let's talk about my top 10 reads for 2020. Narrowing down my list of favorite reads of 2020 to just 10 was so insanely difficult. It almost was putting me in physical pain trying to figure out how I was going to do it. And so it took me a while. It took me several days of thinking about it and just watching my reviews that I did, some of my weekly wrap-ups, talking about emotions as I was experiencing it. It took research and just kind of getting back in my feelings for these books. So here we go. And with number 10, we're going to start with Sleepwalking, which is book 3 in the Nightmareland Chronicles by Daniel Barnett. I love this book. Daniel Barnett is just one of the best wordsmiths I have encountered. And every one of his books gets better. Like Nightfall, the first book, was insane. It was so good. And when he came out with book 2, it was even better. And it's like, the bar is raised. This is where we're going to be. But then with book 3, it was even better. And I mean, it blew my mind with how this man is able to keep topping himself. I mean, in my opinion, he started out with perfection in the first book and then he's just kept going. So I am so excited to continue the series. But if I had to pick one of the series that was my favorite, it was Sleepwalking, and I can't tell you why because it would be a spoiler. Number 9, The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. This little standalone fantasy will change your life. If you love fantasy, you definitely need to add this one to your list to read. This story was amazing. So I can't really explain it to you in a way that wouldn't be a sort of spoiler about one of the characters that I love. So I'll just tell you my favorite character in this story is Misaki. And it's just one of those that is much more fun to talk about if you've read it because of the things that happen. There are things that happen that I thought I didn't want to happen, but they happen in the most beautiful of ways, and it just worked, and you didn't know you needed it until you got it, kind of thing. But oh my gosh, this book was absolutely astounding. Number 8, The Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter, which is book 2 in The Burning. Funnily enough, I put Rage of Dragons right ahead of it in the number 7 spot on my list. So yeah, I've got both books in this series on my top 10 list for 2020. They are amazing. The only reason why I put Rage of Dragons ahead of Fires of Vengeance, there was no topping the way that this book made me feel in the last half of it. Now, Fires of Vengeance took what happened in The Rage of Dragons and it kept that flame going, no question. So while this book was better overall, there's just no taking the place of the first time something lights a fire in your soul. Number 6, one of my all-time favorite authors, all-time favorite series, it was Peace Talks by Jim Butcher. Harry Dresden is a wizard for hire. He's even in the phone pages. And the Dresden Files is an urban fantasy series that is full of just humor, snark, magic, and absolutely phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Tons of my friends are working their way through this series and I am living vicariously through. But yes, this book was one of my most anticipated reads of the year and it didn't disappoint once I got my hands on it. Coming in at number 5, another book in the horror genre, and that's The Patience of the Dead Man, which is book 1 in the Patience of the Dead Man trilogy by Michael Clark. Oh man, this is one of my top favorite scary book reads of all time, not just 2020. I would definitely recommend this book. And the follow-up book, the sequel, like the second book had a completely different tone to begin with. It was like a historical fiction horror. I don't even know how to explain it, but it was absolutely freaking phenomenal. But this book right here, this is the one that if you're a writer and you want to send me a scary story to read, this is who you're up against. This is the one I'm going to put next to you and say, well, did you write a character that scared the stuffing out of me? Did you have me questioning every sound I thought I heard while reading this book? Guys, this is a phenomenal series. Phenomenal writer. I absolutely enjoyed this book. This is going to be one that I'll probably reread every year. So coming in at number 4 is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. And if you were keeping up, this was actually my number 1 favorite book of the year for the first several months of this year. And now it's at number 4. And you're probably wondering, well, Leslie, what 3 books beat out The Way of Kings? Well, its sequel did, for one. Coming in at number 3, Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, also in the Stormlight Archives. And why this book rated higher than The Way of Kings? The Way of Kings was a lot of setup. It was a lot of intrigue, mystery, questions raised. We got some of those questions answered here. We got more insight on characters. We learned more about the world. But something that was different for Words of Radiance that wasn't there for Way of Kings, I laughed my tail off reading this book. I was smiling and laughing almost the entire way through this 1,000-page chunker. So currently, Words of Radiance is my favorite book of the Stormlight Archives. Coming in at number 2 is Valor, which is the second book of the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. This is my second favorite book of 2020, but it is my favorite of the Faithful and the Fallen series. Not that it's any better than the rest of the books, but in it, you've already become so well acquainted to the characters because John Gwynne just did such a phenomenal job of developing all the characters in the first book. He also did a phenomenal job with the world building. By the time I got to Valor, these people were family. I loved everybody. There's maybe 2 characters at this point that I just didn't like. Everybody else, whether they were good, bad, great, whatever, I loved them. I was invested. I was rooting for everybody. The bad guys, I wanted them to get redemption arcs. Like, this is the one where I wanted everybody to win. Everybody to win. But there was just so much political maneuvering, strategery. It was just so engaging, and I absolutely loved it. Funnily enough, my top read for 2020 was one of my last reads of 2020. And it would not have happened if not for the World Hopper Secret Santa booktuber event. And so how that went is we drew names in the World Hopper group. I drew Andy Smith, and the deal was you were supposed to go to that person's channel, find one of their favorite books that they reviewed that you had not read. You read the book and you review it on your channel. And I chose Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. And even though I had read another Robin Hobb book, I knew how beautiful her prose was, but I was also kind of scared of her because she really broke my heart in the one book I read by her. So I had a little bit of trepidation in going into this, but oh man, this book is not only my favorite read of 2020, I actually kind of think it's my favorite fantasy book of all time. I'm gonna finish the series, the trilogy, the Live Ship Trader series, before I just really start screaming that from the rooftops. But when I started reading this book, 20% in, 25% of the way in, I knew it was going to be a 5-star, and it only got better from there. I mean, it gets all the stars and then all the extra stars and then the stars above that. It was phenomenal. There is literally nothing I can say bad about this. There's nothing I would change. I don't even know how to add anything to it. I thought it couldn't get any better 25% of the way through, and then she kept knocking my socks off. Really looking forward to continuing the series. I am now going to read every Robin Hobb book there ever was, and looking forward to it. I am just absolutely in amazement of the beauty of the prose, the character developments, the elements, the magic system, the world. I just absolutely loved everything about it. Those are my top 10 books of the year, some of my favorite characters, and a few other really fun categories. Again, I ripped all of that off from Jimmy over at the Fantasy Network. Please go down to the description, visit Jimmy's channel. I absolutely adore his channel. He does such a wonderful job. Tell him I sent you. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Hit me up in the comments down below if you've read any of these books. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Those that you disagree with me on, what books would you replace that with? Because I might not have read it, and I might need to get that on my list for this year or next. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.